Welcome to the Vision by Protiviti interview. I'm Joe Kornik, editor-in-chief of Vision by Protiviti, where we look into the future to examine the implications of big topics that will impact businesses worldwide over the next decade and beyond. Today, I'm joined by Nina Henderson, director of CNO Financial Group, International Workplace Group, and Hikma Pharmaceuticals. Nina chairs several human resource compensation committees and is a member of the Audit, Corporate Social Responsibility, and Governance committees for a number of companies. She is also vice chair of Drexel University's Board of Trustees, a commissioner of the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery, and a director of the Visiting Nurse Service of New York and the Foreign Policy Association. Nina, it's so great to have you here with us today.
Great to see you, Joe. Thanks for having me.
Nina, when you think about the future of work, let's say a decade from now, 2030 and beyond, and the people who will be doing that work and how they will be doing it and the impact it may have, what sort of jumps out to you the most?
Well, I've been thinking about this in general, and there's so many things being postulated now about how going to work, being at work, what we'll do, who will do it, where we'll do it, and all that is a lot of things that coming. But that's really kind of near term. So the more fun thing is that you're saying, what about, way in the future, or not way in the future, but 10 years from now or something of that nature. And I think we really have to suspend what we used to call work and what we used to call productivity. I think there's going to be a lot of change in both of those aspects. I also think that what's happened here is we are enhancing a bifurcated society, and somehow we're going to have to learn how to work with that much more effectively. We can't have two parallel economies funded by workers in two different worlds. It will be surreal and there won't be any synergy, and you need synergy to make the world go round, so to speak. So I think that will be kind of interesting. I think there won't be, hopefully, a severe cut between what is now being called knowledge workers, office workers, versus people that are day in, day out producing, making, servicing.
Right. And it's interesting that you talk about that sort of dichotomy between office workers and the two different classes, because one of the great equalizers, or one of the levelers traditionally, has been sort of technologies and some of the collaboration technologies that we've seen during the pandemic. Obviously, we probably wouldn't have been able to get through the pandemic without those collaboration technologies. So we had them before. I mean, they were sort of on rocket fuel during the pandemic in terms of their adoption and their use. So I'm just curious, what are their near-term and longer-term impacts on employees, do you think?
The whole notion of collaboration, maybe we're thinking about that just about the office workers who went home and or went to another part of the state or their vacation home or whatever and collaborated on virtual platforms. I think it's the collaboration is a wonderful word, but I don't know that we have really propelled the ability for true collaboration against the multiplicity of synergistic employers and employees and deliverers of goods, services, product, etc. So I think that's one big thing. You have to redefine what collaboration means and redefine what technology means. As far as there's like a sub question that you bring up to me when you phrase that, and that sort of is this whole notion of how are people responding to this. Now we get a lot of commentary now that people are getting the old ennui, they're being bored about it, they're being detached. I do think one of the serious things here is that human nature is that you want to be around other people. You really do, whether it's socializing, your family, your fellow workers, even to see people walking around a city is kind of exciting. So, or out in the woods, doesn't matter. So we will as human beings always want to see other people. And we've been in a forced situation here where we've had a limited ability to interact. If you've got a family at home, you've been interacting solely with them. If you were, yes, you interact a bit on these virtual platforms, but you're not with anybody. It's a digitized representation. So you're not with anybody. And the reality is you can't really see if someone's looking at you. You can't get all the other cues of communications that humans have in terms of, am I leaning into you? Am I really interested in am I shrugging my shoulders? Or am I looking down at my desk and doing my email while I'm on the Zoom or the Microsoft Teams? So, you just wonder what's really happening here. And I think there's a couple of things that do concern me as we continue to use this technology. One, I think it's very hard to maintain a cultural identity with it, almost impossible. Two, I think it's transactional in nature. You get things done, you check a box, you move on. My niece gave me a mug for Christmas, a 25-year-old. So gave me a mug for Christmas that says, I made it through another Zoom that could have been an email. So, and I think we're just not sophisticated enough to really be selective about how we're doing things. So the cultural thing, the transactional nature. The other thing is that it's very hard to have a sense of belonging, not just culturally, but belonging and exchanging. I do think that will become very difficult for human beings to continue. And then the fourth thing that I'm really concerned about is innovation and creativity. Innovation can be sparked by an individual, yes, but more than likely it's brought to life by groups of people working together. 1, 2, 3, all of that is being lost. And so if we were to rely on, using your words, collaborative technology, I think we would fall behind in a competitive race worldwide.
Nina, you make a lot of great points. I just wonder, I just think how different even this conversation would be between the two of us if we were sitting in a room on a couch, across from each other. All the verbal cues that we're potentially missing, and we've been on so many Zoom calls for so long now during the pandemic. And as we move forward, again, I think a lot of the key is how do we position these tools and how do we use them? You mentioned your niece, who clearly comes from a different generation than you or I. And how they process information is obviously very different. So there's a lot of generational forces too, I think, that business leaders and executives need to be thinking about as they look forward for the next 10 years.
First of all, the niece that you mentioned, she's 25 and she's working and she's had her college and she went through college, came out, etc., went to work before the pandemic. There's a big difference, and I'm going to make that point now. I think we as employers and as people wanting to bring along groups of people to really do well for society and for themselves, we have a major issue. And that is when you look at the high school children and the college young adults over the last 2 years, they've essentially spent all of their time in their childhood bedroom. And the fact of the matter is that this is a tremendous strain because many things happen, as we all know, as parents and as family members, as teachers, as employers, to young people as they proceed through their last years of high school, enter college, or enter the workforce if they don't go to college. If they don't want to, that's just fine. But the fact of the matter is all of the adulting skills that would have naturally progressed in a very formative period of these young people's times have been squashed. And so from a standpoint of employers and societal need, we're going to really have to help these young people come along. As you know, Joe, I'm vice chair of the board of trustees of a university, and we have, and I also chair academic affairs there. We used to give a student that was having trouble 3 semesters to be able to bring themselves up to the capability that was required. We now have expanded that to 4 because we realized that they just weren't ready when they came in. It has nothing to do with how wonderful the high school teacher was or how much they decided. It's just darn hard when you don't have the decision making that comes with having to go, just even in high school, when you join a team. All of those things you were allowed to learn to socialize, make decisions on your own when you went away from home, same thing. All of that has been left. So I think we're dealing with, as employers and as society, a solid 10 years of that group of people needing extra help and some understanding to move forward. That's one. Number 2, let's think about the fact of looking up. For most all of us, the reality is that we have spent the last 10 years looking down. We are looking down at some kind of a machine. And if one loses the ability to look up, you are really actually going to lose the ability to notice colors, to notice forms, to notice those communication cues that you and I mentioned earlier. And so there's a real issue there. Also, if you're spending a large portion of your time on apps, which are pre-digested information being given to you, yeah, you're selecting which one you want, but basically what's in there, you haven't curated, it's been curated for you. And as it has progressed from, let's say, Facebook to Instagram, and now we're down to TikTok and Snap, what do you do with a population whose attention span is 46 seconds? Do you know? So, I mean, I think that I'm not criticizing that. It's really interesting. But how do you work with an entirely different group of people used to receiving things in a quick shorthand way, with perhaps attention spans that are not, they don't desire attention. Do you know, I'm not criticizing, I'm just saying these are realities, and we have to think about how do you enthuse people like that? How do you keep them involved? How do you let them work their own magic? Does this resonate for you, what I'm suggesting here?
Absolutely. I mean, I've had these conversations, exploring this topic with several people specifically around that generational differences between the multi-generations in the workforce, leadership styles, how people have sort of come of age in an age of technology versus not an age of technology. So it's absolutely fascinating. And one thing that I think will be really interesting for companies and business leaders to sort of think about over the next several years, next decade, is where do those people work? I mean, are you going to bring all those people back into a traditional office setting where they get to collaborate or interact with each other, or maybe mentor or maybe shadow someone and sort of see leadership styles? Or will they be essentially, I mean, there's a whole generation now, or 2 years worth of employees who are very comfortable, maybe even more comfortable, working from their home office or working from their kitchen table, and not having to be elbow to elbow with their coworkers or even clients or their customers. So I think that's a really fascinating piece of this. So I'm curious as to your thoughts on, do you ever see us returning to, I guess, what we'd call a traditional work week in a traditional office space?
Well, I think that there's still the traditional work week. If you're Actually, it's been expanded. I mean, I feel like Maggie Smith in Downton Abbey. What's a weekend? Because the reality is that your work week now goes right into Saturday and Sunday. And unless you provide some drop downs on that, it just stays that way. Work is done when you can fulfill it and when you make the time to do it. I don't think that's going to change. I think that what's going to happen is that's going to evolve more. So there will be a work time period, maybe not a work week, but there'll be a work time period. And depending on whether it's a team effort, you'll have to figure things to schedule with other people. Other times, if it's a sole capacity, a thinking situation, you might do that at your leisure, whatever the case may be. So I think the time parameters around work will change. I think the definition of work will change. And I think the word productivity will have to have a whole new definition.
So I'm curious what your definition of productivity will be in the future then.
So I certainly don't think it will be the number of virtual platform meetings that you can throw into a day, or how many boxes on those virtual platform meetings you can get on, 20 or 30 people. I do not think that will be a definition of productivity. I think right now we have fallen into the trap of thinking of transactional activity as productivity. That's not productivity. Productivity is really being able to build, to add on, to create, to open new territories, to open new thought waves, to make new products, to open new markets, etc. That's productivity. And that is pretty hard to do in the way we have been operating the last 2 years.
So we talked about a lot here today, and you've given us a lot to think about. I'm just curious though, when you look out, let's say to 2035, we'll just take 13 years in the future. Give me a few examples of how that might look. Is there anything that we haven't discussed today that you think maybe will surprise us, or will be a little bit different, or that is not quite what hasn't really been in the parameters of this conversation? And then ultimately, do you think work will end up being a more fulfilling, engaging, positive, enjoyable experience for employees in 2035, maybe more so than it is now, or it was pre-pandemic even?
I mean, I think we have to be realistic. Work is work. Work is to under, work is to underwrite your capability to live your life. So there will always be. It's not supposed. It should be engaging. It should be rewarding, both financially and in terms of personal sense of self. It should be give you place in community, both within your overall local community, but also within your business community, your operation community. But it's still work. So I don't think that that's going to change years from now. And sometimes you'll have jobs where you feel tremendously fulfilled, and sometimes you'll have positions where you'll think, oh boy. But so I think that's going to be there. But how we work and what we value within work and how we will choose whom to work for or with will change dramatically as we go forward.
Nina, thank you so much for your insights, your valuable insights, your unique insights. I think that it's such an interesting conversation. Next time, we're going to do it in person.
Yay! Wonderful.
And thanks so much, Nina Henderson, for joining us on this Vision by Protiviti interview. We'll see you again next time.
My pleasure. Thank you, John.